The telegram had 5 words. 5 words that crossed 2,000 miles of steel rails and dusty plains just to ruin her life. Sent her back. Too stubborn. Victoria Hampton let the yellow paper fall from her fingers. It felt like her whole future was a feather drifting down to a cold, hard floor. She'd come all this way, from the civilized streets of Boston to the rugged edge of Wyoming territory. A week on trains and stagecoaches, dreaming of a new start, a husband, a home. And after just 3 days, he'd rejected her, packed her up like a faulty mail-order kettle, and shipped her right back. Too stubborn. "What now, dear?" Elena Hatcher asked. Her voice was kind, but underneath, Victoria heard the professional worry. Elena ran the most respected bride agency in the West. She'd never had a return before. It was bad for business. Victoria stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from her traveling skirt. It was a habit, a way to pretend she was in control. "I suppose I'll find a job." Elena gave her a pitying look. "Here, in Sweetwater, for an unmarried woman with winter coming on." The unspoken words hung in the air. "You'll starve. Or worse." "I will not go back to Boston," Victoria said, her voice low but fierce. "I won't be a failure." She was 22, an orphan with nothing to her name but a good education and a spine of steel. The first had failed to secure her a future. The second had just gotten her thrown out of one. There must be other men, other ranchers looking for a wife. Elena hesitated. She shuffled through the letters on her cluttered desk. "Well, there is one." She said it like she was admitting to a crime. "But I really shouldn't suggest him. Please, Mrs. Hatcher, I have nowhere to go." With a heavy sigh, Elena pulled out a single weathered page. "Francis O'Rourke. He owns a cattle ranch 30 miles out. They call it Willow Creek." She looked up, her eyes dark with warning. "He's a rough man. Lost his wife 5 years ago. Hasn't looked for another until now." Victoria took the letter. The handwriting was bold, decisive, like slashes of a knife. The requirements were brutally simple. A woman in good health must be able to cook, clean, and not be afraid of work. There was no mention of looks, of family, of kindness. It was a job posting, not a marriage proposal. "He's been on my books for a year," Elena confessed. "I've never sent anyone. The ranch is too remote, and he has a reputation." "What kind of reputation?" Elena leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They call him the Wolf of Willow Creek. He keeps to himself. Never comes to town unless he has to. Some folks say he's half wild. They say strange things happened out there, back when his first wife was alive." She shook her head. "I can't send you there, Victoria. It's not right." Victoria's mind was racing. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, naming the man who'd sent her back. "Did he say why I was too stubborn?" Elena's cheeks flushed. "He said you questioned his judgment, argued about how to run his household. I suggested his chickens might lay more eggs if their coop was clean," Victoria shot back. "And that boiling laundry for 3 hours was a waste of firewood." A small smile touched Elena's lips. "You have spirit, my dear. Most men out here, they don't know what to do with that." "Then maybe I need a man who does." Victoria tapped the letter. "This Mr. O'Rourke, has he rejected anyone else?" "He's never had the chance. As I said, I was too afraid to send a woman to that place." That was it. That was the spark. A man no one else would face, a place no one else would go. This wasn't a last resort. It was a challenge. "Send me to him." "Victoria, you don't understand. His ranch is miles from anyone. The winters are a death sentence if you're not prepared. It's no place for a lady." "I'm not a lady anymore, Mrs. Hatcher," Victoria said, her voice like ice. "I'm a woman who needs a future, and I will build it myself, one way or another." She met the older woman's gaze, unflinching. "If Mr. O'Rourke will have me, I will go." Elena studied her for a long, silent moment. She saw the desperation, yes, but underneath it she saw something else. A fire, the same fire Mr. Sullivan had tried to extinguish. Finally, she nodded. "All right, I'll send the telegram." She reached out, her hand surprisingly strong. "But you listen to me. If it's not right, if you feel you're in danger, you send word. I'll move heaven and earth to bring you back." 3 days later, Victoria stood on the same train platform where her hope had died. The reply from the Wolf of Willow Creek had been even shorter than her rejection. "Send her. I'll meet the Thursday train." A dust cloud on the horizon grew into a wagon, pulled by two powerful black horses. The man holding the reins was a silhouette against the rising sun, broad and unmoving. He pulled the wagon to a halt and stepped down. He was nothing like she'd imagined. Taller, broader, with shoulders that strained the fabric of his simple work shirt. His face was all sharp angles, weathered by sun and wind, his eyes a startling, piercing blue under the brim of a worn hat. He looked to be in his early 30s, but his jaw was covered by a dark beard already streaked with gray. He didn't look wild. He looked dangerous. "Miss Hampton," his voice was a low rumble, the sound of rocks grinding together. "Mr. O'Rourke." She stepped forward, her gloved hand outstretched. He looked at it for a second before taking it in a grip that was brief and hard. His hand was calloused and shockingly warm. "You're smaller than I thought," he said, his eyes scanning her from head to toe, as if he were judging livestock. Victoria's chin lifted. "I assure you, my size has never stopped me from working." A flicker of something, surprise, maybe amusement, crossed his face before it settled back into a stony mask. "Didn't mean to offend. It's a rough ride to the ranch. I managed the journey from Boston, Mr. O'Rourke. I believe I can survive a wagon." He stared at her for another long moment, then gave a single sharp nod and turned to her luggage. "This all?" He lifted her trunk with one arm, a motion so effortless it was unsettling. He tossed it into the wagon bed like it was a sack of flour. "We need supplies. Winter comes on fast here." Victoria climbed onto the wagon seat without waiting for him to help. "We had winters in Boston, sir." The corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile. "Not Wyoming winters," he said, climbing up beside her. "Nothing like 'em." As they drove down the town's dusty main street, people stopped and stared. They didn't just look curious. They looked scared. They weren't looking at her. They were looking at the man beside her. The Wolf of Willow Creek was in town, and he was taking a woman with him. He pulled up in front of the general store. "Wait here." It was a command, not a request. Victoria bristled. "I'd prefer to come with you. I need to see what's available." His jaw tightened. He clearly wasn't used to being questioned. But he just grunted and came around to help her down. His hands spanned her waist, lifting her to the ground as if she weighed nothing. The touch was impersonal, but it sent a jolt through her. Inside, the storekeeper's eyes went wide. "Francis, didn't expect to see you again so soon." His gaze slid to Victoria, and his friendly demeanor evaporated. "And who's this?" Francis O'Rourke cleared his throat. The sound was like gravel. "Miss Hampton, she's come to be my wife." The storekeeper went pale. He forced a smile and extended a trembling hand. "Walter Johnson, ma'am. Welcome." He looked at her with an expression of profound pity. While Francis started loading up on flour, salt pork, and ammunition, Victoria walked the aisles. She picked out a cookbook, pencils, paper. Then she started adding more. Dried apples, canned peaches, extra lamp oil. "You'll need more than that," she said, looking at Francis's small pile. He glared at her. I know what I need. She ignored him, turning to the storekeeper. Do you have medical supplies? Iodine, bandages, laudanum. Mr. Johnson started gathering the items, his hands shaking slightly. Francis stood rigid, a muscle working in his jaw, but he didn't say a word. He paid the total in coin, his silence more intimidating than any shout. Back in the wagon, as they left the last buildings of Sweetwater behind, he finally spoke. I've survived 10 winters out there without a woman's advice on how to stock a pantry. Surviving isn't the same as living well, Mr. O'Rourke, she said, her voice even. And if I'm to run your household, I'll do it properly. We're not married yet, he growled, his eyes locked on the road. A chill went down her spine. No, we're not. If you've changed your mind, tell me now. Don't waste my time dragging me 30 miles into the wilderness. He shot her a sideways glance, his blue eyes unreadable. I haven't changed my mind. A grim smile touched his lips. But you might, once you see the place. I don't scare easily, Mr. O'Rourke. No, he said, a strange note in his voice. I'm beginning to believe you don't. They rode in silence for hours. The prairie gave way to rugged hills and dark stands of pine. It was beautiful, but it was a harsh, unforgiving beauty. It was a land that didn't care if you lived or died. How far to the nearest neighbor? She finally asked. 7 miles to the Coltons, he said. 15 after that. The words confirmed her deepest fear. Out here, no one could hear you scream. As the sun bled across the horizon, he pointed toward a dark valley, shadowed between 2 looming hills. There, Willow Creek. It wasn't a ranch, it was a fort. The house was made of thick, dark logs, with windows that were little more than narrow slits. A high, sturdy fence enclosed the main house, the barn, and a bunkhouse. The creek that gave the ranch its name felt more like a moat. 2 men came out of the bunkhouse as they approached. They moved with the lazy watchfulness of guards. Miss Hampton, Francis said, this is Hank, my foreman, and Joe. The men tipped their hats, but their eyes were cold and wary. They looked at Francis, not her, waiting for orders. House is ready, boss, Hank said. Just like you wanted. Good. Unload the supplies. The lady's tired. Victoria followed him toward the house. The front door was made of thick, reinforced planks with a heavy iron latch. Inside, it was dark and smelled of wood smoke and something else, something metallic and faintly unpleasant. The main room was dominated by a massive stone fireplace, big enough to roast a whole deer. The furniture was heavy, rough-hewn, built to last a war. My room is across the hall, he said, pointing to a closed door. This one's yours. He opened another door, revealing a small, cell-like room with a narrow bed and a single high window. The outhouse is back behind the woodpile. He paused at the door. I'll bring your trunk. Supper's in an hour. He closed the door behind him, and Victoria heard a sound that made her blood run cold. A heavy wooden bar sliding into place on the outside of her door. She was locked in. Victoria stood frozen in the center of the tiny room, the sound of the bar echoing in the sudden dead silence. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This wasn't a courtship. This was a prison sentence. She rushed to the door, her hands fumbling for a knob that wasn't there. There was only a simple leather pull strap on her side. She pulled, but the door was solid, unmoving. She was a guest, a potential bride, and he had locked her in like an animal. She spun around, her eyes darting around the room, searching for another way out. The single window was high on the wall, barely wide enough for her shoulders, and covered with a thick wooden shutter, bolted from the outside. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. Elena Hatcher's words came back to her. If you feel you're in danger, you send word. How? There was no telegraph here, no friendly neighbors, no way to run. She was 30 miles from Sweetwater, surrounded by men who followed the orders of a man they called the Wolf. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she forced the panic down. She would not scream. She would not cry. Mr. Sullivan had called her stubborn. Frances O'Rourke was about to find out just how stubborn she could be. She began a systematic search of the room. It was sparse, almost brutally so. A narrow bed with a thin mattress stuffed with straw, a small wooden chest for her clothes, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl. The floor was rough-hewn planks. She ran her hands over every surface, tapped on the walls, checked the floorboards. Underneath the bed, tucked deep in the corner where the shadows were thickest, her fingers brushed against something. A loose floorboard. Her heart leaped. With trembling fingers, she worked the board free. A small, dark space was revealed beneath. Reaching inside, her hand closed around a small, leather-bound book. A diary. She pulled it out, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it. The leather was worn smooth, the pages filled with a delicate, looping script. She turned to the first page. Sarah O'Rourke. October 1870. The first wife, the one who had vanished. She lit the small oil lamp on the washstand, the flickering light casting monstrous shadows on the walls. She sat on the edge of the bed and began to read. The first few entries were hopeful. Sarah wrote of the wild beauty of Wyoming, of her love for her strong, quiet husband. She wrote of her dreams for their future, for the children they would have. But then, the tone began to change. November 1870. Francis is so watchful. He says it is for my own safety, that the land is dangerous. But sometimes I feel his eyes on me, and it is not love I see. It is something else, something cold. December 1870. He has forbidden me from riding out alone. He says there are wolves. I have lived in this territory my whole life. I know the sound of a wolf, the things I hear howling in the night. They are not wolves. January 1871. Hank and Joe watch me. They are his men, loyal to him completely. They do not speak to me unless he is present. I asked Hank to take a letter to my brother in Sweetwater. He told Francis. Francis was not pleased. The bruise on my arm is fading now. Victoria's blood ran cold. This wasn't a story of a marriage falling apart. It was a record of a woman's terror. She flipped through the pages, the entries growing more frantic, more desperate. March 1871. He is building a new fence, so high. He says it is to keep the cattle from straying. I think it is to keep me from leaving. April 1871. I found his mother's poetry books. He never told me he could read so beautifully. He read to me by the fire, and for a moment I saw the man I thought I had married. But then the firelight caught his eyes, and the wolf was there again. May 1871. He locked me in my room today. He said a storm was coming. I heard a rider approach the house, a visitor. I screamed until my throat was raw, but they could not hear me. Who was it? Why did he not want them to see me? The final entry was barely legible, the ink smudged as if by tears or rain. June 1871. I have to get away. I cannot live like this. I have hidden this diary. If anyone finds this, know that I did not leave him. I did not run away. If I disappear, it is because the wolf of Willow Creek has finally devoured me. Do not let him find another lamb for the slaughter. Victoria slammed the book shut, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The metallic smell in the house. It wasn't just wood smoke. It was the faint, lingering scent of old fear, of blood. The bar on her door scraped back. Heavy footsteps approached. Supper's ready, Francis O'Rourke called through the thick wood. Victoria shoved the diary back under the floorboard, her mind racing. She had to pretend. She had to act as if nothing was wrong. She had to eat with her jailer, her potential murderer, and smile. She had to be the perfect, compliant bride-to-be. She had to survive the night. And then, somehow, she had to escape. She smoothed her hair, took a deep breath, and opened the door. "Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke. I'm famished." He stood in the hallway, a dark silhouette against the firelight from the main room. He was watching her, his piercing blue eyes searching her face. She met his gaze with a polite, empty smile, praying he couldn't see the terror churning in her gut. She was walking into the wolf's den, and she had to make him believe she didn't see the teeth. The meal was a silent, tense affair. Francis sat at the head of the heavy wooden table, with Hank and Joe on either side. They left an empty seat for her directly across from him. It felt like an interrogation. He served a thick stew from a black iron pot, the chunks of meat dark and unidentifiable. Victoria forced herself to eat, each bite tasting like ash in her mouth. She could feel his eyes on her, studying her every move. She had to make conversation. Normalcy was her only shield. "The stew is very hearty, Mr. O'Rourke." "It's deer," he said, his voice flat. "Shot it yesterday." "You're a good hunter, then." Hank, the foreman, let out a short, harsh laugh. "Best there is. Ain't nothing escapes the boss once he's on the trail." The words were a clear threat. Joe kept his head down, shoveling stew into his mouth as if he were afraid to speak. "This is a well-built house," she tried again, gesturing to the thick log walls. "Did you build it yourself?" "With Hank," Francis said. "Built it to last. Built it to be a prison," she thought. "My father was in business," she said, inventing a past, a life far from the desperate orphan she was. "He always said a strong foundation is the key to everything." She was talking, filling the silence, trying to weave a web of lies that would make her seem harmless, ordinary. After the meal, Francis spoke. "Hank, Joe, see to the stock." The men left without a word, disappearing into the night. Now they were alone. Just her and the wolf. "You've been quiet," he observed, his eyes narrowing. "It's been a long day. The journey, the new surroundings. It's a lot to take in." He nodded slowly. He rose from the table and walked to the massive stone fireplace. He stood with his back to her, staring into the flames. The firelight danced across his broad shoulders, making him seem even larger, more powerful. "Mrs. Hatcher tells me you have spirit, that you were sent back for being stubborn. I have opinions, Mr. O'Rourke. Some men find that disagreeable." He turned, and his face was shadowed, his eyes impossible to read. "I don't. A woman needs a strong will to survive out here." He took a step toward her. "This land, it breaks the weak. The winters are cruel. The isolation can drive a person mad." He took another step. He was so close now she could see the flecks of gray in his beard, the fine lines around his eyes. "You have to be a fighter, or you get swallowed whole." Was he talking about the land, or was he talking about himself? "I am a fighter," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Good." He reached out, and for a terrifying second she thought he was going to grab her. But his hand went past her, to the wall by the door, where a rifle was mounted on a wooden rack. He took it down, his movements economical and precise. He checked the action, his thumb stroking the cold steel of the barrel. "Because the real wolves will be circling soon." He looked at her, the rifle held loosely in his hands. "The two-legged kind. That's why the fence is so high. That's why the doors are strong." Victoria's heart was pounding. Was this a confession? A warning? Was he trying to scare her, or was he telling her a twisted version of the truth? She remembered Sarah's diary. He says there are wolves. What kind of wolves, Mr. O'Rourke? The kind that follow a woman like my Sarah. The name hit her like a physical blow. He spoke it with a chilling venom. Your late wife? She asked, her voice a whisper. A dark, humorless smile twisted his lips. Oh, she's not late, Miss Hampton. She's not dead. He leaned the rifle against the wall and turned his full attention back to her. His blue eyes burned with a cold fire. She's out there, somewhere, and she has friends. Friends who think I have something that belongs to them. He took the final step, closing the space between them. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. And now, he said, his voice a low growl, they'll be coming for you too. The implication was horrifying. He hadn't brought her here to be a wife. He'd brought her here to be bait. The revelation hit Victoria with the force of a physical blow. Bait. She was a replacement for Sarah, a target to draw out these mysterious wolves. Her mind reeled. Was this the truth, or just another layer of his terrifying game? Every instinct screamed that this man was a liar, a monster who had done something terrible to his first wife. But what if he wasn't? What if there was a threat out there so real, so dangerous, that it required these extreme measures? Why me? She managed to ask, her voice trembling. Because you're a fighter, he repeated, his gaze intense. Because you're stubborn, you won't break easy, and because no one will miss you. The last words were delivered with a brutal, chilling honesty. She was an orphan, a reject, a woman with no connections. She was disposable. What did Sarah's friends think you have? Gold, he said simply. From a payroll coach that went missing up near South Pass 2 years ago. They think Sarah hid it on this ranch before she left, and they think I know where it is. And do you? He stared at her for a long moment. No, but they don't believe me. He gestured around the Spartan room. Does this look like the home of a man sitting on a fortune? He had a point. The cabin was clean but threadbare. There were no luxuries, no signs of hidden wealth. But it could all be a front. Sarah's diary had mentioned nothing about gold or outlaws. It had only spoken of fear, of a husband who was a monster. One of them was lying, and if she guessed wrong, she would be dead. So you expect me to just stay here and wait for armed men to show up? I expect you to play your part, he said coldly. You are Victoria Hampton, my new bride-to-be. You are happy. You are building a new life. You will give them no reason to suspect anything is wrong. You will be my shield. And what if I refuse? He smiled again, that same terrifying, mirthless smile. Then you'll find the isolation of your room is far more permanent than you imagined. The threat was clear. Cooperate or disappear like Sarah. He turned and walked back to the fireplace, picking up a log and tossing it into the flames. Sparks flew up the chimney. We'll be married in 2 weeks. The circuit preacher is due in Sweetwater. A wedding will make everything look legitimate. It will convince them I've moved on, that I'm not just sitting here, waiting. 2 weeks. She had 2 weeks to find a way out. Now, he said, his back still to her. You should get some rest. We have a lot of work to do to make this place look like a home. He didn't walk her to her room. He didn't need to. The message was clear. She retreated to the small, cold bedroom, but this time she didn't hear the bar slide across the door. He was giving her the illusion of freedom, a longer leash. He thought he had her trapped, terrified into submission. He was wrong. She wasn't bait. She wasn't a shield. She was a survivor. She slipped Sarah's diary from under the floorboards. She had to read it again, every word. There had to be a clue, something Sarah had missed, something that would tell her who Francis O'Rourke really was. A desperate man protecting his home, or a cold-blooded killer hiding a terrible secret. Her survival depended on finding the answer. The next few days were a tense dance of deception. Victoria played the role of the diligent fiancée, cleaning the house, organizing the kitchen, asking Francis questions about the ranch. She worked to make the grim cabin feel like a home, adding small touches, wildflowers in a tin can, a careful arrangement of his mother's poetry books on a shelf. It was all a performance, a way to lull the wolf into a false sense of security. Francis, in turn, treated her with a strange, detached courtesy. He answered her questions about cattle breeds and winter pastures, but offered nothing of himself. He watched her constantly, his blue eyes missing nothing. She felt like an insect under glass. Hank and Joe remained silent and watchful, their loyalty to Francis absolute. They were his keepers, and hers. One afternoon, while Francis and his men were out mending a fence line on the far side of the property, Victoria decided to risk exploring the one place she felt held the most answers: Sarah's room. Francis had told her it was his room now, but she knew it had been Sarah's. She had seen the tarnished silver hairbrush on the dresser that first day. The door was unlocked. Her heart pounded as she pushed it open and slipped inside. The room was even more Spartan than her own. A large, unadorned bed, a chest of drawers, a rifle in the corner. It smelled of him, leather, sweat, and cold steel. She went straight to the dresser. The silver-backed brush was still there. Beside it, a framed photograph of a young woman with dark, haunted eyes. Sarah. Victoria picked it up, her fingers tracing the woman's face. Do not let him find another lamb for the slaughter. She started searching, her movements quick and silent. She checked under the mattress, behind the dresser, in the drawers filled with his rough work clothes. Nothing. She ran her hands along the log walls, searching for any loose chinking, any hidden compartment. It was as she was checking the floorboards near the bed that she saw it. A small dark stain on the wood, almost completely faded. It was shaped like a splatter, like something had been spilled there, and someone had tried, unsuccessfully, to scrub it completely away. She knelt, her fingers hovering over the stain. Her mind flashed to the metallic scent she'd noticed when she first arrived. It wasn't fear she had smelled. It was old blood. A floorboard creaked behind her. She spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Hank stood in the doorway, his face a thundercloud. He held a coil of rope in one hand. "The boss told you to stay out of here," he said, his voice a low growl. I was just tidying up," she stammered, scrambling to her feet. He took a step into the room, his eyes flicking from her face to the stain on the floor. His expression hardened. "You're just like the other one, too curious for your own good." He took another step, the rope swinging slightly in his hand. "Curiosity gets people hurt out here, ma'am. I didn't mean any harm. Doesn't matter what you meant." He was advancing on her now, backing her into the corner of the room. "The boss has his rules. We all follow him. It's for the best." Victoria's eyes darted around, looking for an escape. There was none. The window was behind her. The door was blocked by Hank. The rifle was in the far corner, too far away to reach. She was trapped. "What happened in this room, Hank?" she asked, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "What happened to Sarah?" Hank's face went blank. "She left, that's all." "I don't believe you." She pointed to the floor. "What is that stain?" He glanced at it, then back at her, his eyes cold as stone. "Ranchin' is a bloody business, ma'am." He raised the rope, his intentions terrifyingly clear. "Sometimes you gotta put a sick animal down before it infects the whole herd." Suddenly, a voice cut through the tension, sharp as a whip crack. "Hank, that's enough." Francis stood in the doorway behind his foreman. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were chips of ice. Hank froze, the rope still in his hand. He didn't look scared. He looked disappointed. "She was poking around, boss, asking questions." "I'll handle it," Francis said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Go check the horses." Hank hesitated for a second, then gave a curt nod and left, brushing past Francis without another word. The tension in the room didn't lessen. It changed. It became sharper, more focused. Now she was alone with him. And he knew she had been searching his room. He knew she was suspicious. The charade was over. He walked slowly into the room, his boots making heavy, deliberate sounds on the wooden floor. He stopped in front of her, so close she had to crane her neck to look up at him. "I told you," he said, his voice a low, threatening rumble, "that you were here to play a part. I didn't say you could start rewriting the script." He knew. He knew she'd found the diary. Victoria's mind worked frantically. Denying it was useless. He was too smart for that. She had only one card left to play, the truth, as she knew it. "Her diary," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I found Sarah's diary." His expression didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. "Did you now?" "She said you were a monster. She said you held her prisoner. She said if she disappeared, it was because you killed her." She stared up at him, her chin held high, challenging him. "Did you, Mr. O'Rourke? Did you kill your wife?" He looked down at her, and for the first time, she saw something other than cold control in his eyes. She saw a flicker of profound weariness, of pain. He let out a long, slow breath. "Yes, Miss Hampton," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "In a way, I did." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket. He opened it. Inside wasn't a picture. It was a tiny, intricately folded piece of paper. A wanted poster, shrunk down to the size of a thumbnail. He held it out to her. The name on it was faded, but clear. Sarah Siren O'Malley. "The woman you call Sarah," Francis said, his voice thick with a history of betrayal, "was one of the most ruthless outlaws in this territory, and she wasn't my wife. She was my sister." The words hung in the air, shattering every assumption Victoria had made. Sister, not wife. She stared at the tiny wanted poster, then back at his face. The story in the diary, the fear, the imprisonment. It was all cast in a new, terrifying light. "Her name was Clara," Francis said, his voice hollow. "My younger sister. And Sarah O'Malley destroyed her." He began to talk, the words pouring out of him as if a dam had finally broken. He told her about growing up in Nebraska, about his dreams of building a ranch. He told her about his sister, Clara, a gentle, trusting soul who fell in love with a handsome stranger who passed through their town. A man who turned out to be part of Sarah O'Malley's gang. He filled her head with stories of adventure and freedom, Francis said, his hands clenching into fists. "She ran away with him. For 2 years I heard nothing. I thought she was dead. Then, one night, she had shown up at his door. Not the sweet girl he remembered, but a haunted, terrified woman. She was on the run, not from the law, but from the gang, from Sarah. Sarah O'Malley doesn't let anyone leave," Francis explained, his voice grim. "Clara knew too much about their hideouts, their plans. Sarah sent men after her, so I did the only thing I could think of. I hid her." Willow Creek Ranch wasn't a prison for a wife. It was a sanctuary for a sister. The high fence, the strong doors, the watchful eyes of Hank and Joe. They weren't to keep someone in. They were to keep the real wolves out. "We pretended she was my wife, Sarah O'Rourke," he continued. "It was the only way I could explain her presence here without raising suspicion. But living a lie, it wore on her. She was terrified, constantly looking over her shoulder. She started a diary, a fiction, a story of an abusive husband. It was a life raft for her, a way to feel like she was in control of her own story. Victoria thought of the diary entries. He has forbidden me from riding out alone. He says there are wolves. It was all true, but the meaning was twisted. He was protecting her. I screamed until my throat was raw, but they could not hear me. He was hiding her from Sarah's men. What happened to her? Victoria asked softly. Where is Clara now? The pain in his eyes was so raw, it was difficult to look at. Sarah found us, about 5 years ago. She came here herself. He gestured to the faint stain on the floor. There was a fight. Clara, she tried to stand up to her, to protect me. He choked on the words. Sarah killed her, right here, in this room. My own sister. He looked at Victoria, his face a mask of grief and rage. I killed Sarah O'Malley that day, and I buried them both out on the ridge, side by side, the sister I loved, and the monster who took her from me. The story was monstrous, tragic, and it explained everything. The reputation as the wolf, the isolation, the fear in the townspeople's eyes. They didn't know the details, only that violence and death had visited this ranch. The gang never knew what happened to Sarah, Francis finished. They just know she came here and never came back. They think I killed her and took the gold they believe she had. They've been watching me, testing me, for 5 years, sending riders by, asking questions in town. Now Victoria understood her role. It was so much worse than being bait. By bringing you here, by marrying you, I'm sending them a message, he said, his voice flat and hard. The message is that the past is dead and buried, that Francis O'Rourke has moved on, that there's nothing left for them here at Willow Creek. And you think they'll just give up? No, he said, his eyes like blue flames. I think it will finally draw them out into the open. I think the leader, a man named Jedediah Kane, will make his move. And when he does, I will be ready to end this, once and for all. He had brought her here to start a war, and she was standing on the front line. You should have told me, Victoria whispered, the enormity of his deception, his gamble, crashing down on her. Would you have come? He asked, his tone leaving no room for doubt. No, of course not. She would have run. Any sane woman would have. But she wasn't in Boston anymore, and there was nowhere left to run. They'll kill us both, she said. They will try, Francis corrected her. He picked up the rifle from the corner of the room and held it out to her. But first, which is why your education is about to continue, Miss Hampton. You've learned to stock a pantry and run a house. Now you're going to learn how to shoot. Over the next week, the ranch transformed into a military training camp. Francis was a patient but demanding teacher. He taught her how to load, aim, and fire the rifle, then the pistol he kept in his desk. He made her practice until her shoulder ached and her hands were raw. She learned to reload in seconds, to stay calm, to control her breathing. The Boston orphan who had once taught piano was now learning how to kill. Hank and Joe, now that the secret was out, treated her with a new respect. They were no longer her guards, but her comrades. Hank taught her how to track, how to read the signs of a rider approaching from miles away. Joe showed her the best places for cover around the homestead, the blind spots, the hidden lines of fire. They were preparing for a siege. In the evenings, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Francis would study maps of the surrounding territory, planning, strategizing. Victoria would clean the weapons, her mind a whirlwind of fear and a strange, burgeoning resolve. She had been thrust into this war without her consent, but now that she was here, she would not be a helpless victim. She would fight. One evening, as she was rereading Clara's, diary, something caught her eye. It was an entry she had skimmed over before, thinking it was just a throwaway detail. April 1871. Francis brought me a gift today, a book of poetry by Wordsworth. It was his mother's. He said she always told him that poetry is the food of the soul. He has marked one of the poems. She dwelt among the untrodden ways. A strange choice. It is about a woman named Lucy who lived unknown and died in solitude. It makes me sad. Victoria felt a prickle of unease. She went to the small bookshelf in the main room. She found the worn volume of Wordsworth. She flipped through the pages until she found the poem. A single passage was underlined in faded pencil. She lived unknown, and few could know when Lucy ceased to be. But she is in her grave, and oh, the difference to me. It was a poem of grief, of loss. But as she looked closer, she noticed something else. Faint pencil marks, almost invisible, in the margin next to the title. Not words, a series of numbers, 314, 725, 101 and 12. It was a code. Her heart started to pound. Clara hadn't just been writing a fictional account of her fear. She had been leaving a message hidden in plain sight. Victoria's mind raced. What could the numbers mean? She looked at the poem, then back at the numbers. 314. The third stanza, first line, fourth word. She counted. A violet by a mossy stone. The word was mossy. 725. There was no seventh stanza. It had to mean something else. She looked at the bookshelf. There were 7 books. What if it wasn't about the poem, but the books themselves? 7th book, 2nd page, 5th word. She pulled down the 7th book, a thick manual on animal husbandry. She turned to the 2nd page. The 5th word was under 1 to 12. The 1st book, the Bible, 1st chapter, Genesis, 1st verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. She counted to the 12th word. There were only 10. It didn't make sense. She tried again. 1st book, 1st page, 12th word. She opened the Bible's frontispiece. There was an inscription. To my dear son Francis, may you always find beauty in the world. With love, Mother. The 12th word was world. Mossy. Under. World. It was gibberish. She had been so sure. Frustration and disappointment washed over her. Maybe it was just random doodling. She put the books back, her shoulders slumping. As she pushed the Wordsworth volume back into place, she felt it snag on something. She pulled it out again. A small corner of the leather binding on the spine was loose. She picked at it. It came away, revealing a tiny, tightly folded piece of paper tucked inside. It was a hand-drawn map. It showed the layout of the ranch, the creek, the 2 large willow trees by the water's edge. And near the base of the westernmost willow, there was a small X. Next to the X, a single word was scrawled in Clara's handwriting. Home. Victoria stared at the map, her breath caught in her throat. This was it. This had to be where Sarah O'Malley's gold was hidden. Clara had found it. She had hidden the map and left a coded clue, a false trail, in case Sarah's gang ever searched the house. But the word, home, it seemed so strange. Suddenly another diary entry flashed in her mind. He read to me by the fire, and for a moment I saw the man I thought I had married. It wasn't Sarah writing that. It was Clara. Clara, who was not his wife. Clara, who was his sister, the man she thought she had married. The truth hit Victoria with the force of a physical punch, knocking the air from her lungs. It was all a lie. Francis had no sister. The wanted poster was a fake. The story of Sarah Siren O'Malley was a fabrication. He was a widower. His wife's name was Sarah, and he had killed her. Victoria's mind reeled, frantically piecing it all together. The diary was real, every terrified word of it. His wife, Sarah, had been his prisoner. He was the monster she had described, The stain on the floor was her blood. He had murdered her. But why? The gold. It had always been about the gold. Sarah must have been the one connected to the gang. She had hidden the gold, and she had refused to tell him where. So he killed her. And for 5 years, he had been searching for it. Then he had an idea. A cruel, brilliant idea. He would get another woman. A bride. Someone with no connections. Someone disposable. He would feed her a story, a lie about a sister and a gang, and he would use her. He would make her search for the gold, thinking she was helping him. He would let her explore, let her poke into corners, hoping she would find what he had been unable to find for 5 years. He hadn't been teaching her to shoot to fight a gang. He had been teaching her to shoot so she could defend the gold for him once she found it. Or maybe he planned to kill her too, as soon as she served her purpose. An unfortunate casualty in a tragic outlaw attack. She looked down at the map in her trembling hand. The X, the word home. It wasn't a place, it was a person. The name of the gang's leader. Jedediah Kane. Francis hadn't been waiting for Kane to show up. He was planning to use the gold to lure him into a trap. Victoria felt a wave of nausea. She was a pawn in a game so dark and twisted she could barely comprehend it. Francis O'Rourke wasn't just a killer. He was a master manipulator. He had played on her sympathies, earned her trust, armed her, and all the while he was planning to betray her. She heard footsteps on the porch. He was coming back. She had to hide the map. She carefully tucked it back into the book's spine, her hands clumsy with fear. She shoved the book back onto the shelf, just as the door opened. Francis stood there, a slight smile on his face. It was the first time she had seen him smile with anything resembling warmth. It was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. "Any luck with your reading?" he asked, his tone light, conversational. He had been watching her. He knew she'd been looking at the books. He was waiting for her to find the clue. She had to play along. Her life depended on it. "No," she said, forcing a casual tone. "Just passing the time." "Good," he said, walking over to the fireplace. "Because I think our wait is almost over." He looked out the narrow window, into the deepening twilight. "There's a rider coming, just one, moving fast." He turned to look at her, and his eyes were alight with a feverish, greedy fire. "It's time, Victoria," he said. "Time to welcome our guest." Victoria's blood turned to ice. A single rider. It had to be Jedediah Kane. Francis's plan was unfolding, and she was trapped in the middle of it. She grabbed the rifle he had taught her to use. The cold, heavy weight of it was both terrifying and reassuring. She was not the same woman who had arrived in Sweetwater 2 weeks ago. "Where do you want me?" she asked, her voice steady. "Upstairs," he commanded, grabbing his own rifle from the wall. "There's a window in the loft that overlooks the entire yard. You'll have a clear shot. Don't fire unless I give the signal. Understand?" She nodded, her heart hammering. "What's the signal?" "You'll know." He gave her a hard, appraising look. "Don't disappoint me, Victoria." She ran up the ladder to the small, dark loft, her boots echoing in the silent house. Dust motes danced in the single beam of moonlight slanting through the loft window. She knelt, resting the rifle barrel on the sill. Below, the yard was bathed in pale, ghostly light. She could see Francis move to the front door, taking up a position just inside, shielded by the thick log wall. Hank and Joe melted into the shadows near the barn and the bunkhouse, becoming invisible. The trap was set. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, closer. A lone rider on a dark horse emerged from the trees, slowing to a cautious walk as he approached the high fence. He stopped at the gate. "O'Rourke!" a voice called out, rough and impatient. "I know you're in there. I've come for what's mine." It was him, Jedediah Kane. "The gate's open, Kane," Francis shouted back, his voice booming in the still night air. "Come on in. We have business to discuss." Kane dismounted, his movements wary. He pushed the gate open and strode into the yard, a long duster coat swirling around his boots. He was a big man, with a thick, dark beard and a pistol strapped to his hip. He stopped in the middle of the yard, his eyes scanning the dark windows of the house, the silent outbuildings. "Where is it, O'Rourke?" Kane demanded. 5 years I've been patient. My patience has run out." "It's safe," Francis called from the doorway. "But it's going to cost you." Victoria watched, holding her breath. This was it, the confrontation. She could feel the tension stretching to a breaking point. Kane laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You're in no position to be making deals. I could have brought my whole crew down on you, burned you out. I came alone as a courtesy." "I appreciate that," Francis said, his voice deceptively calm. "That's why I'm going to offer you a trade. The gold. For the woman." Victoria froze. What was he doing? This wasn't the plan. "What woman?" Kane spat. "The one I brought from Sweetwater," Francis said. "My new bride. Turns out she has a taste for other men's money. She found your stash. She's willing to sell it to you, for a price and a ride out of this valley." It was a double cross. He was trying to sell her out to Kane. He was going to hand her over, along with the gold, and paint her as the thief. He would be the wronged husband, the innocent victim. And she would be dead before she ever reached the next town. Kane seemed to consider it. "Bring her out. Let me see her." "Victoria!" Francis yelled up at the loft. "Come on down. Mr. Kane wants to meet you." Her mind raced. If she went down there, she was dead. If she stayed here, Francis would likely kill her himself. She had one chance. One shot. She steadied the rifle, the wooden stock pressed hard against her shoulder. She centered the sight on Jedediah Kane's chest. Her hands were surprisingly steady. But then, something Kane said stopped her. "You're a fool, O'Rourke," the outlaw sneered. "Just like your wife was. All that loyalty to a government that let your father die in a squalid prison camp. All that honor." Victoria's finger froze on the trigger. His father. Down below, Francis stepped out from the doorway into the full moonlight. His face was a mask of pure hatred. "You leave my father out of this." "He was a good soldier," Kane said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "A Union marshal. It was a shame what happened to him. Ambushed. Betrayed by one of his own men. A man who stole his identity, his name, everything he had. A man who then spent years hunting down anyone who knew the truth." Kane took a step forward, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Tell me, Francis, what's it like living with a dead man's name?" Victoria felt the world tilt on its axis. The story, the lies, they were deeper and darker than she had ever imagined. "My name," Francis said, his voice shaking with a rage that seemed to come from the very depths of his soul, "is not Francis O'Rourke." "No," Kane agreed. "It isn't. But you've played the part well. The bitter, isolated rancher, all a front, all so you could wait. For me." "My name," the man in the yard said, his voice ringing with conviction, "is Sergeant Thomas Hatcher. And you murdered my commanding officer. You murdered the real Francis O'Rourke." The name hit Victoria like a lightning bolt. Hatcher. Elena Hatcher, from the marriage agency. It couldn't be a coincidence. "I have been hunting you for 5 years, Kane," Thomas Hatcher declared. "I followed you to this territory. I knew you'd come back for your gold. The gold you and Sarah O'Rourke stole after you betrayed your unit. Sarah wasn't his wife. She wasn't his sister. She was Jedediah Kane's partner in crime. The woman Thomas Hatcher had killed in this very house 5 years ago wasn't an innocent victim. She was a killer, and he had taken her name, her ranch, her entire life, and turned it into a trap. Everything was a lie, a magnificent, intricate, desperate lie for the sake of justice. And now, Thomas said, raising his rifle, justice is here. The signal. That was the signal. From the shadows, Hank and Joe opened fire. Kane spun around, surprised, firing his pistol wildly toward the barn. But he was outnumbered, outmaneuvered. Victoria didn't hesitate. She took a breath, held it, and squeezed the trigger. Her shot was true. It hit Kane square in the shoulder, spinning him around. He staggered, firing one last shot toward the house before collapsing in the dust. The silence that followed was absolute. Slowly, Thomas Hatcher walked toward the fallen outlaw. Hank and Joe emerged from the shadows, their rifles ready. Victoria scrambled down from the loft, her own rifle still clutched in her hands. Thomas knelt beside Kane, checking for a pulse. He looked up at Victoria, his eyes, for the first time, completely clear of shadows and lies. "It's over," he said. Later, after they had secured the body and the ranch, he told her everything. His real name was Thomas Hatcher. Elena Hatcher was his aunt. She was the only person in the world who knew his real identity. She was his lifeline, his connection to the world he had left behind. The real Francis O'Rourke had been a federal marshal, a war hero, and Thomas's mentor. Kane and Sarah were part of their unit, traitors who had murdered O'Rourke and stolen a union payroll. Thomas had been left for dead, but he'd survived, and he had sworn an oath to bring them to justice. He had created the entire identity of the Wolf of Willow Creek, a broken, dangerous man, to lure Kane out of hiding. He knew Kane would never be able to resist coming back for the gold. "And the diary?" Victoria asked. "Sarah's," he said. "I found it after I killed her. The story she wrote was a lie, a fiction she created in case she was ever caught, to paint herself as a victim. I kept it, hoping it would be useful." He looked at her with regret. "I never intended for you to find it. I was going to tell you the truth once I was sure I could trust you." "Trust me," she said, the sting of his deception still sharp. "You used me. You put my life in danger." "Yes," he admitted, his gaze unflinching. "I did. I needed someone strong, someone stubborn, someone who wouldn't break. My aunt, she read me the telegram from Mr. Sullivan. Sent her back. Too stubborn. I knew right then. You were the one. The only one who could survive this." He reached out and took her hand. His was still warm, still calloused, but the touch was different now. It was gentle. "I am sorry for the lies, Victoria, but everything I did for justice, for a good man's memory." She looked at him, the man she had thought was a monster, a liar, a killer. He was all of those things. But he was also a hero, a man of honor, driven by a loyalty so fierce it had consumed his life for 5 years. "What now?" she asked. "Now," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, a real smile this time. "The gold goes back to the government. Kane's reign of terror is over, and Thomas Hatcher can finally come back to life." He squeezed her hand. "The question is, what does Victoria Hampton do now? You're free to go. I'll give you a share of the reward money. You can go anywhere, start a new life." She looked around at the rough log cabin, the high fence, the wild, unforgiving land. It wasn't the life she had imagined for herself. It was harsh, and it was dangerous, but it was also real. And for the first time since her parents had died, she felt like she was home. "I don't think so," she said, a smile of her own finally breaking through. "I was promised a marriage to the owner of Willow Creek Ranch, and I am far too stubborn to be sent back twice. What do you think? Did Victoria make the right choice, tying her future to a man with such a dangerous past? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of deception and justice on the American frontier, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the strange and the mysterious. Thanks for watching.